Well, joining me now in the studio is Haras Rafiq, Managing Director at the Counter-Extremism think tank, the Quilliam Foundation. He launched Prevent with Ruth Kelly in 2006. And on the line from Salford is Dr Rizwaan Sabir, a lecturer specialising in counter-terrorism and insurgency at Edge Hill University. Welcome to you both. Haras Rafiq, let's start with you. You were there at the start with Ruth Kelly and setting up Prevent. What do you think you've achieved?
Well, first of all, I think that Prevent, from the beginning, when it was first set up, and I remember being in the government task force after 7/7, when the concept strategy was launched and the 4 Ps, Prevent being one of them. And there were always two parts of the Prevent strategy. There was the sharp end, which was once somebody who's been identified as showing support. In those days, they used to call it Al-Qaeda-inspired extremism, not really realising that Al-Qaeda didn't inspire extremism, but rather extremism inspired Al-Qaeda, and really providing interventions for people once they'd been identified, showing support. And then there was a softer end of Prevent, which was really building the resilience amongst our communities, both Muslim and non-Muslim, so that when youngsters are indoctrinated from a Muslim community's perspective or from a non-Muslim perspective of the far right, they've got the ability to push back. Now, the problem we've had is that we've really had an inconsistent governmental approach on this, and for the last 5 years, or rather 5.5 years, we've only had half a Prevent strategy. We haven't had the second half, which is a softer end, and really looking at countering and preventing the extremism before individuals are radicalised. Really, we've just been focusing on preventing attacks happening here in the UK.
Dr Rizwaan Sabir, do you accept that analysis?
I do agree with Mr Rafiq's interpretation of the two-pronged approach of the Prevent programme, where I would challenge his assertion that the government has failed to kind of actualise its softer, creating resilience within the community and kind of trying to make the community act as a bulwark to what is claimed to be Al-Qaeda's ideology. I would challenge that. And what we essentially find, and what I would challenge that kind of case or claim on, is that this hasn't been the case. What we have is we've had a very sophisticated development in which information has been gathered from the community in order to formulate a strategy that is essentially one that's based on counter-propaganda, and that is to challenge the ideology of Al-Qaeda, but also to equip members of the Muslim community with key messages that they themselves, independently of the state, can essentially disseminate. And this is essentially the softer, creating resilience within communities that has been operationalised through a unit set up in the Home Office, the Research, Information and Communication Unit, for example.
The entire time you've been speaking, Haras Rafiq has been shaking his head.
I'll tell you for why.
I'm not surprised.
Salam to you, Rizwan, I hope you're well. In 2010, there was a Prevent review which actually decided to separate the two parts of this strategy, and there was a governmental department called the Office for Security and Counter-terrorism, which was given the sharp end. If you look at the Prevent review, the Department for Communities and Local Government were tasked in 2011 to produce this counter-extremism strategy, really focusing on building this resilience. This still hasn't been done, number one. Number two is that if you cast your mind back to a debate, or rather a heated argument last year between Michael Gove and Theresa May, where he talked about beating off the crocodiles and the swamp not being drained, this was really his frustration at the fact that he believed that the counter-extremism, the non-violent extremism, challenging and building the resilience wasn't being done because there was no strategy. And the government itself has admitted this, and hence they're going to launch one around about September time.
Okay, well, let's look at some of the issues that came out of Andrew Hoskin's report. Lord Carlisle, right at the end, talked about Prevent becoming an industry almost. And also there was mention of Prevent having a kind of toxicity at its heart, that the brand had become toxic. I mean, I've been looking at Twitter, and quite a lot of people see Prevent as those people who are involved in it as house Muslims, a really potent reminder of the kind of hierarchy of slavery. What do you think, Haras Rafiq? Do you not accept that Prevent has now become too toxic?
Not necessarily. I think there is, first of all, a Prevent lobby which has emerged over the last sort of 8 months, and there are certain organisations and certain individuals that are very vocal at putting together this coalition. But if you look at whenever, certainly up until 2010 and 2011, whenever there was a round of funding that was proposed by the government for British Muslim organisations to bid for Prevent funding, it was often oversubscribed by a factor of 10 to 1. Even now, when there is a launching funding of a new round of Prevent funding, or when the Home Office or the OSCE is looking for organisations, there are lots of Muslim organisations that actually do apply for this type of funding. So yes, there are some people who want to push this agenda of Prevent being toxic, and there are some people who will believe that it is toxic, absolutely right, but without actually understanding what it's about.
Dr Rizwaan Sabir, this idea of a new group setting with the relatives of victims, the fight back starts here. What do you think that will add to the strategy that clearly hasn't been as successful as people might want it to be?
Without delving into the intricacies, it's the latest in a long list of programmes and initiatives introduced under the Prevent programme. But where I just want to pick up on a really important point was on Mr Rafiq's point about lots of Muslim organisations applying for funding under the Prevent programme. Yes, I would agree that lots of organisations did apply for funding under the Prevent programme, but I would add a slight caveat to that. And the caveat is that a lot of these organisations were not interested, especially when the programme was introduced, in countering what the government calls extremism. A lot of this was to allow them to carry out community cohesion and social cohesion, social economic programmes that they had been denied for a very long time. And through the Prevent programme, they found an avenue in which they could acquire very generous resources being given by the state without very many checks or balances that would essentially allow them to carry out this work. So for that reason, lots of organisations did apply for the funding, but many of them didn't actually carry out the work. Hence why, when the review happened in 2009-10, community cohesion was a part of the Prevent programme that was completely scrapped by the government, and it became a lot more harder-edged around channel intervention.
Just to find a very brief word,
I think Dr
Haras
Sabir is absolutely right. A lot of organisations did apply for funding for social cohesion, but that still goes back to the point that the brand of Prevent was not toxic. And also, this new campaign that you've mentioned in the report earlier on, this actually isn't a government-funded programme. This is actually done by the Federation of Muslim Organisations, which is based out of Leicester and the Markfield Institute and places like that. So this is actually part of the civic society response that needs to happen if we're to win this battle.
We'll leave it there, gentlemen. Haras Rafiq from the Quilliam Foundation and Dr Rizwaan Sabir from Edge Hill University. Thanks to you both.